I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill. Yeah, if you know those iconic first lines, then you probably have an idea about what today's episode is going to be about. How does a bill become a law? For people at home, you might be wondering how this affects you at all. How is a bill becoming a law even relevant to me? Well, the truth is, a bill becoming a law is really important to your everyday life. What kind of hours can you work? What allows your kids to get free or reduced lunch at school so they aren't hungry? What makes it illegal for your 5-year-old to drive you to work anyway, or can go to work for you for that matter? All of these things have laws and regulations to help keep order in our society. And a bill is what you get when people come together with an idea and someone writes it into concrete form. For example, if you believe that all students in the United States should have driving school integrated into their school systems, you could tell that to your local representative and they could write that into a bill that could be introduced to Congress. This topic is one that we probably learned way back when, so I'm here to give everyone a little refresher on how a bill becomes a law in the easiest way possible. If you're someone who has ever said, "Why should I care about bills? It's not like I've ever come up with one anyway," or "Who cares about Schoolhouse Rock? I'm only here for Bill Nye the Science Guy." I get it. I understand. But the thing is, if you see a problem in your community, I want you to have the tools to have something be done about it. So stick around and be prepared to have "I'm just a bill" stuck in your head for the next day or so. My name is Myleah Lofland, and this is What the Gov. The Constitution has a lot of guidelines for what kinds of laws can be put in place, so there's no amendment in particular about how a bill becomes a law. Let's take a look at one of the more uncommonly referenced amendments. Hey, you never know when you'll need to know it for a fun trivia game or a party fact. It's time for the Amendment Corner. The Third Amendment is one that isn't often talked about because, well, it's rarely ever needed. It's one of the least cited sections of the U.S. Constitution. The Third Amendment states, "No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law." And, well, it says what it says. The amendment has a bit of history, and here on What the Gov, if we didn't give you a bit of a history lesson while we were here, well, I wouldn't be doing my job. The first Quartering Act was passed by the British Parliament in 1769. It said that the American colonies must pay for the British soldiers that were protecting the colonies. It also said that if British soldiers needed a place to stay, they could freely stay in the barns, stables, inns, and alehouses of the colonists. Could you imagine the government just saying, "Hey, yeah, soldiers can stay on your property anytime they want because we said so"? For the colonists, this was unforgivable. The second Quartering Act was passed in 1774. It was much worse. It allowed for British troops to stay wherever they wanted, including the colonists' homes. Your homes. This was considered a major violation of privacy and angered the colonists. It was part of what the colonists called the intolerable acts of the British government and was one of the many things that pushed the colonies towards war. That's why in the Constitution, colonists and the Founding Fathers said enough was enough. They would not allow something like that to happen again in the future of their country. That's why we have the Third Amendment. Because there have been so few wars on American soil, we don't really reference the Third Amendment all that often. However, it is the amendment that has been used to demonstrate a citizen's right to privacy by saying that it implies that the government cannot enter private property without the consent of the owner. And that's all we've got for the Amendment Corner. Let's get back to today's main point. How does a bill become a law? Why can't Congress just get things done faster? What are the requirements for something to become a law? Let's dive in and get some answers. But first, a word from Bill.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. and I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law.
You heard the man. In order to become a law, a bill must first be developed and determined. Bills can be considered public, which affects the public, or private, which affects a certain person or entity. So, for example, a public bill would be something like, we believe that people should stop eating in public parks across the nation because it creates a lot of trash. So, what about private bills? For the relief of. 4 words that typically form the opening of a little-known type of federal law can get someone out of a tight spot that they may otherwise be unable to get out of. That is, if a member of Congress is willing to write you one and be your sponsor. Private laws, pieces of standalone legislation that apply only to specific individuals, families, or corporations, have granted citizenship to illegal immigrants, waived personal debts owed to the government, and bestowed federal health care and retirement benefits to employees or spouses who might not have otherwise been qualified. These are incredibly rare and are often introduced under very specific circumstances. So far, in 2019, there have been 41 private bills introduced. Most of them are for immigration. There are a lot of critics who say that private bills often clutter the legislative process because it tries to go around the bureaucracy and plays into favoritism. However, none of the private bills introduced this year have been enacted into law. But for public bills, after the content has been decided on, a member of Congress must introduce the bill and become its sponsor. Representatives usually support bills based on their relevance and importance. Typically, this will be based on the people in the area who vote for them, known as their constituents. If the constituents feel like the issue is important and often are rallying or writing letters about the issue, well, it would be in the congressperson's best interest to support bills that their constituents would approve of. After a bill has been brought to the House of Representatives, the committee decides whether to accept or decline the bill. This leads to them making changes to that bill. That's when the subcommittee comes into play. They might focus on specific details or work on the bill while the main committee focuses on other bills. They make changes and decide whether to accept or reject the bill. That response goes back to the full committee, who makes the final decision on the matter. Yeah, it's a lot of back and forth to make sure the bill is agreed on by all parties. Once it's all polished and ready for the floor, the bill is reported and is considered and put to a vote. The bill is referred to the Senate if the majority of the House votes to pass the bill, where they'll do the process all over again. If the language of the bill changes significantly from when the House originally said yes, a committee of people from both the House and the Senate have to meet and review the bill. That's bicameral legislature for you, baby. If it gets through the whole process, then they choose to send it to the president, where he either signs on it and it becomes a law, or vetoes it. That's right, after all of that, the president can send it back and the process starts all over again. Let's talk about vetoes. A bill becomes a law if it's signed by the president. Even if the president doesn't sign it, the bill can still become law after 10 days if Congress is in session. However, if Congress abruptly ends their session for whatever reason before the bill has been on the president's desk for 10 days and the president has not signed the bill, then it does not become a law. This is called a pocket veto. The pocket veto has been commonly used by presidents since 1812, but it's unclear exactly when the president is able to use that tool. Is it during the adjournment of Congress after one session ends and a new session is about to begin with newly elected members? If you didn't know, that's known as sine die, which means without day. Why would the president be able to veto while Congress is just taking routine adjournment? But unfortunately, that's just part of the ambiguity with pocket vetoes. Thanks a lot, founding fathers. And to add to the confusion, there's a hybrid pocket veto. It's called the pocket and return veto, in which the president uses both the traditional method of sending the bill back to Congress after effectively issuing a pocket veto. There have been more than a dozen of these hybrid vetoes issued by presidents of both parties, but those are pretty unique, so we won't get into the nitty-gritty of the veto. If the president vetoes the bill, it is sent back to Congress with a note listing their reasons. The chamber where the bill started can attempt to override the veto by getting 2/3 of those present to make a vote of support for the bill. If the first override is successful, the other chamber of Congress also has to hold a vote. If both chambers successfully override the veto, then the bill becomes a law. This process is why it's so difficult to get laws passed. However, it also stops any one party from trying to force legislation through without it being approved by all parties. That's a lot, right? So what bill have we seen recently going through this process? Recently, we've seen this with the Reunite Act, which was drafted to reunite families separated at or near ports of entry and for other purposes.
Can I just see my mother, please? Parents taken away on buses, separated from their children.
Her mom is the only one she has. That's her guardian.
In immigration raids across Mississippi on Wednesday.
I need my dad for me. My dad didn't do nothing. He's not a criminal.
It was sponsored by Junior Senator of California, Kamala Harris, and was introduced on July 17th. So far, it has been read twice and referred to the House Judiciary Committee. That's the committee in charge of overseeing the administration of justice within the federal courts, administrative agencies, and federal law enforcement entities. So it's in the early stages, but it's definitely something we'll want to keep an eye on, as immigration and the separation of families remains one of the most hot-button issues of our time. But that's all we have time for today, folks. Our content comes from community questions, so if there's a question that makes you go, what the gov? Then send me an email with your name and question at socialmedia@laurel.md.us. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to leave us a like, subscribe to Laurel TV, and leave a comment with your question below. Here's to a future where we all know a little more than we did the day before. Take care.